it's not a describable, definable, here's what it looks like type of thing. As you're talking through being more competitive, you're talking about being passionate, being resilient, running towards the fight, um, no fear, like all these things that actually for me, and it's just words, I get that, but for young athletes, words have meaning. So when we say compete, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm supposed to be like mad at my opponent? Am I supposed to do anything it takes to take them down to win this game? Or am I supposed to play with passion, love the game, be a great teammate? Welcome to the Parenting Athletic Kids podcast. We have another session here with Paul Weidner. He and I are going to go back and forth on one topic in these podcasts, these specific podcasts. Today, we're going to be talking about competitiveness, what that looks like, how we can develop that, if we can develop that more in athletes, how parents can help push that along. Paul, great to have you again. Welcome back to the podcast.
Happy to be back. Let's go.
Let's go. Let's dive in. So define competitiveness for us. What do you think that word means, if there's a definition for it, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So I want you to get the ball rolling. You're hitting lead off. Break it down for it.
Yeah, I think in a very short definition of it, it's people or athletes or whatever that enjoy the pursuit of success. And that can be big picture, it can be short term, whatever it is. But I think that definition in and of itself doesn't really help us as far as improving in that area, or like what can we do about it. So that's the definition of it, in my opinion. But things that we need to be careful of or be aware of when it comes to competitiveness are like, what are some of the things that are making it so athletes maybe don't want to take that next step into, I'm going to go all in and dive in and continue to run to the fight. I bet in this podcast, I'll say that term probably too much, like run to the fight, run to it, don't run away from it. And those are the types of characteristics that are maybe one step behind the competitiveness that we want to continue to instill in our athletes. So any athlete that looks at a challenge and goes, I want that challenge, I want to lean into it, I want to run to it. I got an opponent across the field from me that I know wants to beat me just as bad as I want to beat him, and I welcome that. Those types of things are things that help define and or describe competitiveness to me.
That's really good. I love how when you say run to the fight, I think that's a great description, almost gives a visual of what that might look like. On that note, so what do you think keeps people from being competitive?
Yeah, well, there's, not every single thing that we would try to pursue is something that we would be so passionate about that we want success so bad in. So I think back to like the difference between the kid that is playing college sports, like the NCAA or whatever, like where that's kind of a big thing and very competitive and hyper competitive. And then they go play pickup basketball with their buddies. And you can see it's just a different level of intensity. And that's not for any other reason than like, well, I care a lot about one and I don't care so much about the other one. And so some kids are just there for different reasons. They're playing this sport because they enjoy the activity of it and all that. And they're not as hyper competitive and want to lean in. And that's totally fine. I think I would encourage people to identify that if that's the case and maybe not try to push so hard and want them to be more than that. That's one area. The other area I think that keeps people from trying to be competitive is that the more competitive you allow yourself to be, the more you allow yourself to care. I don't always love that phrase, but that's the best way I could put it. Like the more you allow yourself to care, the more when you lose or when it doesn't go well, the more it hurts. And so you're trying to protect yourself from that. And that's really the one where if you have somebody that's so passionate about something, but they just won't free themselves up in that way, that's where parents and coaches and teammates and the athletes themselves can really make improvements if they're struggling, I think, with competitiveness, is just to try to remove some of those barriers.
Love it. So I think it's important for parents to understand and or help their son or daughter to understand if it's important to them, if whatever event it is, whatever game it is, whatever they're doing. So first and foremost, like, why are we doing this? Like asking that question. Is it just have fun with my buddies? Then it might be a little bit less of a competitive nature. I really like that. So that's really good. And then we'll dive definitely into the Hertz piece a little bit more. Why do you think it's important for an athlete, if it is something they want to pursue it, if it is something super important to them, why is it important to be competitive? Why is that something we talk about so much? Why is that something that coaches are striving? Why isn't it just like, we want you to go out there and enjoy the game, play with passion? Why is the competitive nature something that we're pushing, we're striving for in some of the athletes?
Yeah. Well, if you have a situation where you allow yourself to be really competitive and you care about it, you're very passionate about it, when you allow yourself to go to those places, the places that say, like, I'm going to be super intense with this, obviously trying to control myself, but the competitive nature, those juices are really, really flowing. I think some of the most special moments and special things that you learn about yourself or get to experience for yourself come when you allow yourself to do that. Anybody that goes through life and doesn't let themselves try to pursue things in a passionate way and then ultimately a competitive way, I don't know if you live as fulfilling of an experience, whether it's day to day or just like big picture, as you otherwise would. And so allowing yourself to dive in, passionate about it, I love it, I'm going to experience this for all that it's worth, good and bad. When you look back on that 5 years from now, you go, man, I'm really glad I did that. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Because if you wanted to go, there's like 10,000 foot view and then like 100,000 foot view that goes like, why do sports matter at all? Well, actually, they don't. Like, why would you do any of this? It's just because of the experience of it is so good and so fulfilling. And I think that we need to let ourselves get to that place in order to experience some of those really fulfilling things. And then always looking for ways to try to connect those things to life and make it so you have long-term things that you can learn from it. There will come a time where you won't, the whole, like, I'm going to choose whether to be competitive or not and have to deal with that competitiveness. There will probably come a time in your life where you're not going to have a choice. So trying to get a job in a competitive market, trying to get promoted within your own company. If you're in a sales job, you're trying to make sales and do all those types of things. The competitiveness is going to be tugging at you, not the other way around. And so if you haven't ever let yourself get to the point where you understand what that intensity feels like in your mind and can handle it, I don't want that to be when you're 25 trying to get your first promotion and you are a train wreck because you've never had to deal with that. Is that something that a 14-year-old kid is probably going to be able to have the perspective on? No. But as coaches and as parents, we try to look at the 25-year plan of sports, not just the 2-day plan. And the 25-year plan of sports means that hopefully they're more equipped later on to handle some of those things than not. So that's kind of the way that I view a couple of reasons why you'd want to get into the competitiveness of it. Hopefully that's enough of a reason in and of itself. But what do you have on that? Like, what are some of the main reasons why you go, well, I want my athletes to be competitive or experience the competitive nature of it for blank? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're all over the place, unfortunately. So just the word competitive or compete and the way we throw it around, I think is really, for lack of a better term, weak. Like, it's not a describable, definable, here's what it looks like type of thing. As you're talking through being more competitive, you're talking about being passionate, being resilient, running towards the fight, no fear, like all these things that actually, for me, and it's just words. I get that, but for young athletes, words have meaning. So when we say compete, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm supposed to be like mad at my opponent? Am I supposed to do anything it takes to take them down to win this game? Or am I supposed to play with passion, love the game, be a great teammate, so that's where I actually don't like the word that much. And this again might just be me, but when I talk to athletes about it, they don't know the actionable strategies to be more competitive, right? So that's what I think athletes, parents to understand. If we're throwing that word around, how does an athlete actually step on the field and take action towards that? Mm-hmm. And again, I think running towards the fight is is a great picture of it. It gives a great description, but even what does that look like? How do we step on that pedal? How do we run towards that? So we'll get more into that, but does that make sense? Like, it's one of those like misused, overused words. And in my opinion, I don't see, here's what I struggle with. I just talked to an athlete, and then I was texting with the parent afterwards and talking to the parent about what we went through. And this athlete has been working on not showing so much emotion when faced with adversity. And this athlete did a great job of that last weekend in the tournament, whenever it was. Strikes out, walks back to the dugout, no emotion. And I say, that's great. Like I know inside that they had emotion, but I shared this with the parent. The parent was like, I don't know if he was being super competitive, right? Like, okay, what do you want here? Do you want the freak out session, the throwing of the bat, the tossing of the helmet? Yeah, that makes them look competitive, but that's not what we want. We want them to sit with it. You know what I mean? So that's the problem I see. Like when we're watching games, when we're watching our son or daughter, and we're like, they're not competing. Well, what makes you say that? Like, we want them to be in this flow state, this zone, this where they're just playing free. They're playing with passion. They have no fear. Why do we need to throw things? Why do we need to get pissed at the umpire? Oh, they're super competitive. Where's the line? So I just went crazy on that.
I want to know your thoughts on this statement. Competitiveness should be viewed more along the lines of how you act prior to a potential event, not as a reaction to whatever the outcome of the event was. Right? So like,
I love that. Yeah.
If you're being competitive, it means you're trying to put yourself in the best position you can going into an at-bat against a guy who's an all-conference pitcher that throws 91 miles per hour because you're like, I can't wait to get to the plate. How you react after striking out to that, off that guy, whether you throw your helmet or are here, monotone with it, that's not competitiveness one way or another. It's whether you looked forward to that at-bat against the guy that you maybe knew you were a little outgunned against and you said, bring it on anyways. That's, I think, more what I think of when I hear you say that. What are your thoughts on that?
That's awesome. I think that's 100% accurate. How do we as coaches or as parents, we don't know what's going on in their head as they walk up to the plate, but we do see the reactions to things. We do see, how they're responding to adversity, all these other things. So I think when we look at it, we're looking at the wrong things, to your point. But how do we know if they're being competitive when they're walking to the plate? Is it they walk up with amazing body language, chest stuck out, like this bravado? Does that mean they're more competitive? Maybe for some, but not for others. Maybe they're faking it. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean they're more confident stepping to the plate. So that's the really big thing I struggle with is we see this and I hear coaches yelling, we got to compete. And I'm like, I get it. I get what you want here, but having athletes understand what that means. So when you say that, how do you define that, walking to the plate with a competitive? Is it something you can see? Or is
That
it,
part, that's where I get lost too, because I don't know how you're supposed to assume that you can see it and also be a mind reader in it. It's just like, are we putting ourselves, like, are we encouraging athletes to have that mentality? And then after that, they can either have the self-awareness to know, when I say that I wanted to get to the batter's box against that pitcher, I meant it or I didn't mean it. Like that, sometimes that's self-awareness and the kid doesn't even know whether he, what he was thinking or feeling. And, or like, I'm too afraid to admit that I didn't actually want to. So I'm just going to tell you that I wanted to get into the batter's box because I know that answer sounds better.
right.
And that's such a tricky thing. And I also get lost, probably very similar to where you get lost on that, where I don't know how you can, like, I don't know how to say it looks one specific way. It probably doesn't. I don't know how you can find the absolute truth of, well, if you look for this, that means he is being competitive. And if you look for this, that means he's not. Probably not he or she. That's probably not the case. But there is something going on, between the ears of the athlete in those moments. And whether we can see it or not, that's true. Are we doing the things that we can do to encourage the thing that is going on between their ears to be like, again, run to it. Like, I want this challenge. I want to have success against this guy and then guy or girl. And then, for some people, it's like, I want to get a hit off them and I want to let them know, like, I think that's been, maybe more and more as of late, some of the celebrations and things like that happens. And I try not to squash any of that at all, because some of that is just genuine enjoyment and the line of what's right and wrong. And that has moved, but that's a whole tangent to get on a different podcast. But there is something that's going on in the mind of the athlete as they're walking up to the batter's box, whether we can see it or define it or know it, not sure. But is it something that they're looking forward to that challenge or not? And we just try to put our athletes in a position to want the challenge.
That's awesome. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So, and we talked about this just before the podcast. It's a little bit easier, I think, to define what's keeping us from being competitive than it is to actually describe what being competitive is or looks like. So I think as before we hit on that, I think competitive, what it is being passionate about what you're doing, having a certain level of confidence, being able to overcome adversity, being resilient. Like those, what else, before we get into what it's not, what else would you say it is? So passionate, no fear. What are the other things that if you're looking at an athlete and you're like, I can tell they have this compete. And again, looking at them, you just never know. But I'll try to stay away from that. But what do you hope to build? What are the skills, the character skills, the traits that you hope to build in an athlete that will lead them to be more competitive?
So I don't have anything different than what you said, but I want to expand a little bit on the resiliency piece, because there's run to the fight and then there's stay in the fight. And so there is some athletes that will run to it. They'll want the challenge, but the second that 91 mile per hour all conference pitcher gets a strike one call that was that far outside, they take themselves out of the fight, because now they're thinking about a different fight that doesn't do them any good, right? So the resiliency part comes into play in the stay in the fight piece more than the run to the fight piece, because when you're in the fight, you can run to the boxing. I mean, I'm throwing analogy after analogy, but you can run to the boxing ring. But as soon as you take that first right hook to the chin, or, the uppercut to the chin, are you still in the fight, or is that it for you? Like, are you done? So, just wanted to expand a little bit on that piece that you said, but otherwise I don't have anything different than what you stated there. I think that was really good.
Love it. So before moving on, because I was jumping all over the place, let's break down, the 3 or 4 things, character skills needed to be more competitive. Passionate, what else? Resilience. That's 2 of them. What do I think I listed off 3 or 4. Can you remember what else would you say? Passionate,
I believe you said
resilient.
confidence was one of them too. Yeah.
Confident, which is a whole nother podcast. Go back and watch it. when we got into that and what that looks like. Really good. Anything else? I think things like the all these are controllable to a certain extent, but maintaining a really good energy, maintaining a really good attitude, being a great teammate. You take that punch. Are you still, a good teammate? So some controllable things within that. I think as parents and as coaches, those are the things that we can talk about and lean into, which all put together will make a more higher level competitor.
Yeah.
Agreed?
Yep. I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Agreed.
Hey, we're in agreement. That's top notch. So
That's
what all those things, and we could break down each one of those. Where are we losing passion? Where are we losing the great teamwork? Where are we losing energy? Where are we dipping in our attitude? What are the things that keep us away from that? What are the things that keep us from being that competitor?
Mm-hmm. So, I think about this. This seems to happen a lot with like our 13, 14U athletes, where they're coming to an age where they care a lot about what their peers think all of a sudden, right? So just one of the main examples would be like, they are somebody that is afraid to lean into the challenge of something hard because A, they don't want themselves to look bad in front of their peers, and maybe B, more importantly, if their peers can sense that they cared a lot about that, that's like not cool if you cared and failed, right? So they're gonna play off the like, I didn't care anyways in the first place, and
Right.
whether they're playing it off or whether it's authentic, they're not allowing themselves to either be focused enough to actually attack that challenge, or let themselves get to a place where they did want that challenge in the first place, as opposed to, I'm going to get in the batting cage and I know this pitching machine is 85 miles per hour. And rather than swinging and missing at the first one and being like, okay, focus, I got to get on time for this next one and go, they swing and miss. They want to step out and laugh about it and haha, that was really funny. And you're not really leaning into that challenge. And maybe that comes into play more in training than it does in games, but I think it's still important to go over. So that was the first thing. Like, are you overly concerned in a bigger picture with what other people think about you? And is that controlling the way that your mindset going into things? Because what other people think about you has no useful place in the moment of competitiveness. If you really think about it, like, it's really just you and the task, or you and the opponent, or whatever. What your teammates think, what your coaches think, what your parents think, what your grandparents think, what your girlfriends think girlfriend thinks doesn't matter in those moments. So that's maybe the first one. Before I bounce into a different one, I want to know your thoughts on experiences you've had with that, and how often you see that play out with the different ages or different ranges of things.
Yeah, I think you said the age range where it does. There's a sliding scale on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It could be later, it could be earlier, depending on the kid, the athlete. For sure, that's really good. I mean, any thoughts that are coming in that aren't useful to the athlete playing free. So I'm going to go back to that one, as you do, running into the fight a little bit, because an athlete I talked to last night experienced that this weekend for the first time. 13-year-old athlete. Like, that was the first time I played free, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's just the most amazing thing. How did you get there? Well, I just wasn't. We could go down a whole nother. Well, I'm going to go into it right now. A hard thing athletes have, a problem athletes have, is ones that are really invested in this think they need to take that high level investment onto the field. So they are worried about what the coach thinks, what their parents think, what their teammates think. It's natural. It's normal for them to be worried about those things. Like, I work really hard at this. I want to have success at this. The crazy thing is, those really high intense thoughts, those really thoughts of pursuing greatness, they take that to the plate or the free throw line, or behind the center in football or whatever, jumble up their brains and slow everything down, and make it harder to compete, make it harder to play with passion, make it harder to play free. So we want those athletes, whatever the thoughts are, back to your point, like if it's just, I want to impress my friends, whatever it is, to be able to play without those thoughts. And then they're going to be ultra competitive. They're going to play free. They're going to play with passion, all those, the list that we made, they're going to be great teammates. So I think that's really good. And parents knowing that if you see that they're not playing with passion and with resilience, just telling them to do so isn't going to make a difference. There's something deeper there. There's a reason they're holding back. And it might be, as Paul's talking about, they don't want to do it because it's really hard if they fail when they go out and compete to the best, when they play with passion. It's really hard then when they fail. In a past podcast, you were talking about being on the top of the ladder, taking those extra steps, and then the fall is much, much harder when you fall from that ladder, as opposed to just stepping onto the second step of the ladder, then the fall isn't that hard. I think that's a really good analogy. So anyways, parents, I think we need to be aware of all the possible potential reasons they might not be looking like or feeling like, or however we do it, playing super competitive. I love going back to playing with passion. Like, what's the difference? Playing with passion, I kind of know what that looks like. The athlete can know what that feels like. The competitive thing, there's too many mixed messages of what that looks like. So I would rather coaches and parents say, go out there and play with passion. Mm-hmm. You know. So anyways, so you wanted to, anything on that, or that you had another point you wanted to get into?
Yep. So two things. I'll try to remember both of them as I go one direction. First one is the other way that I was going to go with the competitive piece is something that you said, or things to try to remove, is something that you said right at the beginning of when you started explaining that. Are you allowing all the work that you've put in and the things that you've built up with just how hard, you've attacked this, you've put in all this time and effort and resources and all that. Is that allowing you to say, I get to now free myself up and go? Or is that actually ratcheting up the anxiety for you because, well, I can't fail now because I took 1,000 swings last night. I can't fail now, right? So that's it's so different for every athlete. And you, as parents, you just have to know as best you can, try to figure out which one of those two things is happening. Like, if you can say, I'm putting all this work in, and it's making my athlete be more anxious because they feel like they've paid a lot and now they need to get something in return for that. You got to try to switch that to, you've put in all this effort, and now the hay's in the barn, so to speak. Look at what you've made. Be proud of that and just go, because there's nothing you can do about that now. And so that was the first thing I was going to do. It is almost repeating what you said, but that terminology, like the hay's in the barn, or like just a very clear, it's this or it's this, hopefully paints an easy picture for people to try to understand. I think that was good. So that was the first thing that I thought you said. Does that line up a little bit with what you were talking about there?
1,000,000%. Is a million more than 100%? Yeah, for sure. I love that. Again, you're really good with the analogies, and it paints a picture in the head. Super important. I think as parents, the athletes are already, we've talked about this before, the athletes are already, when it's game time, there's more things in the head. There's more pressure. There's more anxiety. There's more fear. There's more all these other things. If we can just say, you know what, this is your time to let go. Just be free out there. It's super powerful for the athletes. The coaches should be saying that. And this is something Coach Mark Downey, I know, talked about. I think a lot of coaches, we've talked about this before. Like the practices, Coach Downey always said, the practices are for me, for him. Mm-hmm. This is where we get better. This is where we grind. This is where we work on the things that we need to get better at. The game is for the player, meaning I'm going to step back and you just play. You just play. We're not going to yell at you if you make a mistake. We're not going to emphasize a strikeout. This is where the hay is in the barn. Love that. Like, just go out and play with joy, play with passion. I keep going back to this. Play free, but it's super hard for the athlete, for the coach, for the parent. I want to see the result of my effort, my work, my money I've spent. I want to, and I get that, but that's the wrong way to go. And the athlete is already going that direction. If we can be like, and have fun. So much easier for them to get in that backyard, think about the wiffle ball game, think about not think about anything, like just playing for the joy of the game. It will benefit them so much this weekend, next weekend, going forward, if it's something they're passionate about down the road in college, wherever they end up going.
You did use the word fun there, by the way, which I know we talked about in a previous podcast about like what's so fun. It's fun until it should always be fun, but it's fun. And then maybe that word turns to passion, and then maybe it turns into something else as they get a little bit older. But I was like, you said the word fun. We had talked about that in a previous podcast about whether or not that's actually the word to be thinking about. But passionate is certainly, can be a little bit synonymous with that when you're going through it.
When fun comes up is when I start thinking about wiffle ball. So I'm thinking about 6 and 7 year olds, and if they hit a home run, we got a cooler full of juice boxes sitting there waiting for them. You know, whatever. So that pops in that. Anything else to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the other thing, as we've done this podcast, there's just a common theme of like trying to define passion and be like, well, it's actually this word all combined. And then it's trying to find competitiveness, and it's actually this, and it's all combined. When working with an athlete, and I think that this is important probably for the two of us, but parents are really, in this as well, maybe even more so, is that because of all the different ways that we can go in our minds when we hear the word competitiveness, I think when you're starting to have that conversation with the athlete, I would let them define that, so that at least when you are talking about it, you know what they in their head mean by that. And then you can reshape that definition with them if you need to. But don't just glaze over the word competitiveness or, pass over the word passion and be like, does my definition of that match the athlete's one or not? So that's the other thing that I wanted to say was take a step back and start with that question about what that means to them, and then let it go from there and work with that definition first and foremost. Does that make sense?
For sure. That's beautiful. I think, and as coming into these podcasts, and I always think, and this, our minds go to places that we believe from things that have built up, things we've read, things we've gone through personally, you, I, whoever, parents, and it doesn't always, our beliefs, our thought processes don't always jive with the athletes. So that's really awesome. The same player that when I asked him, and he said he played free, again, bring that term up again, he played free this weekend. Immediately I went to like what that looks like and what that means. But I did in a moment of being smart, which happens every once in a while. But I asked him, like, what? Well, break that down for me. And he actually couldn't. He's 13. Like, I don't know what it felt like or how to describe it. And I was like, well, that's super cool. Like, it's just your experience. I just asked him to try to, think about that a little bit, what thoughts and actions he was having around that allowed him to do that, because that's where he wants to be next weekend and beyond. But at 13, he didn't know how to articulate it, which maybe even at 23, 33, he wouldn't know how. That's kind of that zone, that flow, like it's hard to describe. So I thought that was just, I was blown away that he not only, and he didn't try to make up either which kids will sometimes try to do. What does Travis want me to say here? Right? So we have to be a little bit careful of that as parents too. But that's perfect. That's really good. Anything else we'll start putting a bow on this one. Anything else you wanted to get to as we were diving into this?
I think this statement is true for a lot of different things from a mental performance standpoint, but on the topic of competitiveness or, even confidence or just other different things as well, be careful when, if they happen to have a good game, they played really well, be careful to use the terminology of, see, you competed so well today. Or the reverse, which is they went 0 for 4, 4 strikeouts. You didn't compete very well today because of how hard it is to define, and sometimes it can be hard to capture and it can be hard to think about. It's at best kind of confusing if they aren't able to, so when I get hits, I'm competitive, and when I don't, I'm not competitive. And at worst, it's like, you must be seeing a completely different measuring stick that internally I'm not feeling at all. And now I don't trust you in any of my mental performance conversations. So it's not me encouraging you to never use the word. It's me encouraging you to understand not to always tie the word with results, because it can be hard for the kid, the athlete, really of any age, even all the way up through college. Like, college coaches need to be aware of this with their athletes too. So it's not just children, not just little kids. Are you confusing them, and are you staying on the same kind of measuring stick that they will benefit from? Or are you just looking at the results and trying to say, see, that's competitiveness? Well, no, I hit a line drive up the middle because I was on time for the fastball. That's what happens when I'm on time for a fastball. So that's the last thing I think I have, is just to be careful with that. And you can actually gain a lot of trust the other way too, if you do it the other way around, where they have a bad game, they go for 3, swing at a curveball in the dirt, and you actually point out to them ways that you saw them still be competitive, because that lets them know that you are kind of a safe place for them to go to with those conversations about, but I noticed your process was still good in whatever, mental performance capacity that is. So use it to your advantage and try not to use it to your disadvantage as best you can.
To put a bow on that, I love that. Again, Paul's coming up with them today. Let the athlete lead the conversation. Don't assume we know what they were thinking, feeling, whatever. Let them lead the conversation. How did you feel out there today? That's really good. And then staying away from result-based things, which you just said, like the 0 for 3. Okay, how do we hunt the good? So I think those are two really good things. Let the athlete, and we talked about this in other podcasts, and I've had athletes on here that love the idea of them leading the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think even my son's only 8 or 9. Awesome. Like let them start at that point, and in our next podcast, we're going to talk about intrinsic motivation. That helps them to develop that. They start thinking about it. They start becoming creative with their thoughts, and self-aware is super important to their development. So I love those two pieces. Really good. Any parting words here?
Nope. That's great.
Okay. Well, thanks so much again, Paul. Parents out there, hope this helped with the competitiveness. We kind of jumped around and a little bit, but certainly hope this helped you to help your son or daughter to become more competitive, if that's something they're interested in being. And circling all the way back to the start, make sure what their intentions are, make sure what their why is, make sure what's important to them before you have any of these conversations. If you have any specific questions for Paul and myself, go ahead and shoot me an email, mindrighttraining@gmail.com, or put your question in the podcast comments, and we're going to try to keep this going and answer if you have any specific questions. Thanks again, Paul, man. We'll check in again real soon. And parents out there, more great podcasts to come. Thanks again, Paul.
Bet. Thanks, parents. Talk soon.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please be sure to like, follow, and especially share the podcast. If you want more information on strategies that you can use to help optimize your son or daughter's athletic experience, please check out my book, Parenting Athletic Kids. It's available on Amazon. Thanks again, and we'll be back with another podcast really soon.